Good afternoon. This is Mark's Musings, and I'm Mark, and we are broadcasting on WCTV in Wilmington, Massachusetts. Interview various authors, local authors, and ask them about their writing and their writing routine and the books that they have produced. Today we are pleased to have with us a local author by the name of Robert MacDougall. And Robert is here sitting at the studio. We are happy to have him here. How are you doing?
Very well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great, Robert. Thank you so much for coming and participating in this interview. So a little rainy out today, and sometimes you get even though you try to get here to the station, you make wrong turns
That's exactly what I did, but I found it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you made it, and I'm glad you're here now. So, tell me a little bit about your background. What did you do as a vocation?
Well, I was a world history and American history teacher for almost 50 years.
Oh my God, yes.
I started in 1966 at Southfield High School in Southfield, Michigan. Taught there for 5 years. And then I came to Massachusetts. I taught for 33 years at Tewksbury Public High School. And then after I retired there in 2004, I taught at Northern Essex Community College for a few years.
Nice.
And then I got an opportunity to teach at Lawrence Central Catholic High School, where I taught history there until 2015.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful. So you had a really full teaching career.
Yeah, and quite varied. Public school, private school, junior college. It was a lot of fun.
What are some of your memories that you have, sort of students or incidences or something like that? Any particular ones that bring to mind?
Those are many things after 49 years. But,
yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Just one thing that just popped into my mind the other day was that I had heard that a student I had my first year teaching, who, by the way, is now, 49 years older than that. so she's, 67. She went into teaching herself.
Oh, nice.
And she told somebody that she uses a lot of the same techniques that I had used when she was in my class, so that was quite gratifying.
Isn't that wonderful
Yeah.
to have somebody learn from you and take it off into their livelihood? Well, that's super, yeah. And so now, after teaching all those years, you got a lot of ideas about how to teach students and different mistakes people make, different things that people have success with. So, what are some of those things that you learned?
Well, when I was teaching and also in the writing of the books that I've done since then, I have a little acronym that I follow, ICEP, ICEP. The letters stand for I, inform. I try to make my course or my book as informative as possible, but without getting too stodgy about it. I try to keep it light. Especially in my books. I don't want to bog people down. I don't want my book to feel like homework.
Yeah.
So that's the I, inform. E is to entertain. You get the C part, challenge. I don't want people just to learn things and memorize them just for the sake of knowing them. I want people to think about things. For example, when the election of 1860 occurred, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and the South started seceding from the Union, and it looked like there was going to be a civil war. Lincoln had the opportunity to compromise. He could have compromised, and the South would have accepted it, and there wouldn't have been a war. But he chose not to, and the result of that was a war that killed 700,000 or whatever people. It was terrible. Worst war in American history. So I asked people to think about, well, was Lincoln right to do that? Should he have compromised? Why didn't he compromise?
Yes.
What would you have done if you had been in his situation? When, in the general sense, is it right to compromise, and when is it not right to compromise?
Yes.
So that's the challenge part. The E in ICEP is entertain. I try to be as entertaining as possible, both in my classes when I was teaching and in the book. Try to make things humorous if they are humorous, or find the humor in things. Just try to make it a lighthearted approach to American history. And finally, personalize. That's the P at the end, ISEP. History is much more interesting if we personalize it, if we think about it as human beings, and just think about ourselves in those situations. How would we have done? And for myself personally, I know all of the history for the last 70 years or so. I know just about everything that happened, well, not everything that happened, but a lot of what happened since World War II. And that is about 1/4 of what's happened since the Declaration of Independence. So I know a lot of American history.
Yeah.
And if you go through your family and all the people involved in your family going back, you can personalize their attachment to the events of American history way back when. So that's what I try to get people to think about.
That is so true. And I guess in your classroom, you probably have them bring information about their fathers, grandfathers, uncles, things like that.
That's right. I had a project at Central I did for several years called History and Me, in which I asked the students to write a 2 or 3 page paper about someone in their family that was connected with a historic event.
Oh, yes, yes.
Either they were in World War II, or they fought in Afghanistan, or they immigrated to this country from another country. And that helped the students realize that it's not just a whole bunch of old facts that they're learning, it's people. People make up history.
Sure, sure. I noticed in one of your excerpts in one of the books that you wrote about a hairdresser, that you were having some hair done, and she said that history was her worst subject.
Yeah, in fact, that was in one of my recent books, American History. It's more than the crap you learned in high school. Could I read you that little section?
Yeah, that is quite a catchy title.
I was trying. My point in this book is to try to show people that what they know about American history, or what they could know about American history, is helpful to them. It's not just a crap you learned in high school, like Paul Simon said in the song.
Yes.
When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all. So in the opening pages of that book, I try to point out how most people don't realize that it can be useful. And I tell about a conversation I had with a woman named Tina, a 20-year-old who had dropped out of high school to become a hairstylist. And she talked while she was cutting my hair at a local shop. "So what do you teach?" she asked. "American history," I replied. Her scissors started to snip much faster. "I always hated history," she snarled. "Well, maybe it would have helped you to think of history as a story with interesting characters, rather than just a long list of names and dates to memorize," I offered. "How interesting could old guys in powdered wigs who lived over 200 years possibly be?" she asked, gesturing with a comb and flashing the elaborate rose tattoo on her arm. I guessed her interest in hair helped her remember that those old guys wore powdered wigs, and I was impressed that she actually placed them at over 200 years ago. Hopeful, I ventured on. "Can you think of anything that you learned in history that has helped you in your life?" I asked warily. "No," she stated emphatically, "and that's why I dropped out of high school. I wanted to learn stuff that would help me make money." As I endured the rest of the haircut, I tried to think of ways Tina could make money from knowing American history. All I could come up with was that she could teach it. Several schools have paid me huge piles of cash to do so. She could be a tour guide at a historic site. I hear the camera-toting Civil War buffs at Gettysburg tip very well. Or she could go on Jeopardy. When Alex Trebek says, "He signed the bill creating the Transcontinental Railroad," she could slam her buzzer and blurt out, "Who was Abraham Lincoln?" and win $30,000. I knew none of those scenarios would be very convincing. That's not a lot of money to be made in knowing American history. Later, at the cash register, I dropped 3 $10 bills on the counter to pay for the haircut. The bills lay there with Hamilton's face staring at us. Knowing full well that what I was about to say would be nerdy, I nevertheless could not resist. Look at that. I'm dropping Hamiltons like I'm Aaron Burr. What? Burr killed Hamilton in a duel, I explained. She performed a world-class eye roll, scooped up the money. I almost said, "They were wearing powdered wigs at the time," but I decided to let it go. It was obvious that Tina could not wait for this incredible dweeb who reminded her way too much of her uncomfortable past to leave the shop. So with that story as introduction, I tried to point out what we all kind of know, is that people thought history was boring when they were in high school, and it's of no use. And then I go to the rest of the book to try to show how it is useful.
Well, that's a great idea. Yeah, to show the connection that they have to it. Like, yeah, and
I told my colleagues at Central when I was writing the book that if I couldn't prove that it was worth knowing, then my entire career was wasted. I'd wasted my life.
oh boy, no,
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to say that.
No.
But that is interesting about Hamilton and Burr. You know, you forget about that duel that they had, and you never think about that. You hear names, you see them on the $10 bill there, but you don't necessarily remember some of those things that happened.
Yeah, of course, now it's famous with the Broadway play, and
Oh yes,
I'm not going to waste my shot and all that.
There you go, Hamilton. Yes, that's true. That's true. Well, that sounds great. So that was a little intro there that you had. What is that now? Those are 4 books that you have now written.
Yes.
And what's the latest one that you now Rants? What is that one?
The one that's out right now is called Rants, Raves, and Reflections of an American Historian.
Yes.
This is a collection of 60 essays. Each one is on a different thing. It's kind of good for people if they have it to, you can read a 3 or 4 page essay at night if you're just laying in bed before you go to sleep. It's not long, it's not involved, and each of them I think is kind of entertaining. So
yes, yeah.
they try to be, a lot of them are humorous.
And those are essays that you wrote, yeah.
They're all essays that I wrote, and they're on a variety of different things. There's one, a collection of 4 of them on statues and monuments. There's a lot of conversation about statues lately.
That's correct, yes.
So I talk about that and how they could be maybe made a little better.
A lot of them want to be torn down.
Right,
yeah.
and one of the points I make in there is don't tear them down. Just put a plaque on the statue that tells what it was, who the guy is, and all the dirt about him. If there's dirt about him, like, Washington owned slaves, put that right on the Washington Monument. But don't tear down the monument. What are we going to do with every slave owner? Are we going to blast 2 faces off of Mount Rushmore?
That's true.
Because Washington and Jefferson owned slaves? No, but we can make it clear to everybody, they owned slaves, and Jefferson did father a child with one of his slaves.
And history has its ups and downs. They're not everything is a rosy as people think it should be. Like,
back again to its people. Sinful people.
People, people make mistakes even in our own lives, our own families.
Of course.
There are things that we think twice about now. We say, gee, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
And don't think that people in the past, even a so-called perfect man like George Washington, didn't have moments like that when he made mistakes, right?
Sure.
He had some terrible mistakes.
So in writing your books, you decided, what was the first book that you wrote?
I started it in 1973. It was called The Agitator and the Politician. It was about William Lloyd Garrison, the agitator, abolitionist, and Abraham Lincoln, the politician.
Oh, yes.
I wanted to compare their lives because they were very different people, but ultimately they ended up on the same page.
Okay.
Wanting to free the slaves. Lincoln was very reluctant to come to that. Most people are not really fully aware of that. So I wanted to trace their lives to the point where they did become on the same page, so to speak.
In agreement, yeah.
Yes, in agreement. So I started that in 1973, but then I got involved with teaching and coaching. I coached track and cross country at Tewksbury High for many years. So, and had a family and all of that. So it just took so much time I didn't really work on it anymore for about 30 years.
Oh, my God, yes.
So then, in 2004, when I retired from Tewksbury and had a little more time, I dragged it out, dusted it off, and finished it up and published that in 2005. And then I kind of got the writing bug and started writing more books.
And did you sent it out to different publishers and got rejected, but then you decided that you would try to look for a publisher that would do what you wanted them to do. So.
Yeah, it's sort of like that. I thought, you know what, I'm getting old. I don't have time for all these, to go years and years with all these rejection letters. And, might go right to the end of my life and never get it published. So I thought, well, I'll just publish it myself.
Isn't that great? That's that's one way to do it, because sometimes there are thousands and thousands of books out there. and it's hard to get a publisher to notice you, because
Exactly.
they have a pile of stuff that they read every day. Anyway, so I'm glad that you got that book published, and so that gave you the bug, the writing
Yeah,
bug,
right.
and then you decided to try to push that, market that for a while, and then you decided to do another book.
Yeah, my idea at the time was to have a book about two characters who were major figures in the 19th century, Garrison and Lincoln, and then try to have one that was about two important characters in the 20th century. And I decided to write about Dwight D. Eisenhower and Douglas MacArthur.
Oh, yes, yes.
So I call that one Leaders in Dangerous Times.
Oh, yes.
And it was, again, a comparison of the life of the two men who actually, they too were very different, even though they both became five-star generals.
Yes.
And one of them fought in World War II in Europe and the other one in the Pacific. But between them, their stories cover a lot of the American history of the 20th century, at least the first half of it.
Yes.
So I found it very interesting to research that book and write it. So my idea was hopefully that there'd be a book about the 19th century that teachers could use in their classroom for outside reading, and then another one about the 20th century that they could use.
And now, when you've written your books, you put characters in it to tell the story? Is that what you've done, or did you just sort of tell it yourself?
I pretty much told it myself
Yes,
from sort of the omniscient point of view, or however you want to put it. When I got to American History, It's More Than the Crap You Learned in High School, I did do that one having different characters tell the story.
Yes.
But I was doing it in that book to try to show that there's really only 4 lifetimes between the Declaration of Independence and today.
Can you imagine that? Yes, yes. Yeah.
If you pick the 4 right people, they could tell you the main things that happened in the year in our country from 1776 to now. I chose James Madison to tell 1776 to 1836. Mark Twain covered 1836 to 1900. Alice Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, covered 1900 to 1960, and I covered 1960 to the present. And but that shows that just 4 people, their lifetimes, and not that long lifetimes, just 60 years each,
60, wow.
covers all of the events from 1776 to now.
Sometimes when I tell my grandchildren that my grandmother was born in the 1800s, they say, "What? that was years and years ago. How can that be?" You know, they don't realize that lifetimes overlap, and
That's right.
We see a lot of history. And even in my own lifetime, I can see all of the different events that have happened, different wars and different crises that we've had around the world. So it's
I remember Kennedy telling us there were missiles in Cuba, and we were all afraid we were going to get blown up. And
true.
You know, I can remember that very, very well. And for the kids today, that was eons ago. That was 60 years ago, 50 years ago.
My wife and I were just talking recently about the missile crisis and having to have air raids in school, and we had to hide under our desks. In school, you know, and what that would do, probably nothing, but that was the thing that we were told it would help us. And
well, it inculcated fear in everybody, that's for sure.
It sure did, yeah. Or then you'd go outside, and whenever you hear the horns would blow, you know, and you say, "Oh no, I have to find shelter," you know. So
terrible times.
Terrible times is right. So. So you've written your books, and you've done some fairs. Have you had some success with some of the books that you have written?
Well, naturally, not as much as I'd like.
I know. Yeah.
I think if people knew, if they gave these books a chance, they would like them. The word would spread, and even more people would read them.
Yes.
And I think they're very good.
That's great. That's great.
So I believe in what I've done here. As I go back and look them over, I can see things I might improve. But I think the average person would like reading some of these.
I think that's part of why you write a book is the personal pride that you have in accomplishing that task. You know, of putting in words what you believe in.
Mhm.
Like, you know, so
Right.
it's nice that you were able to accomplish those 4 books.
Yeah. But my American History is More Than the Crap You Learned in High School. On Amazon, it's ranked 1,300,000. But it's funny, if somebody buys one, if just one person buys one, my rank goes up to 66,000 or something.
Is it?
Yeah, it doesn't take much to change
I
it quite a bit. But then if nobody buys it for a few weeks, it goes back down to 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. It's wild.
It is funny how they, compare books like that
Yeah.
with numbers.
Mhm.
So that's super. So when you went to you recently were at the Tewksbury Authors Fair. How was
Right.
that?
That was very good. I'm really grateful that they set that up at Tewksbury. It's a nice thing to get the people together that write books, and we had about 30 people there.
Yes, yeah.
That's not a huge crowd, but they were all interested. It was fun telling them about the books, and we sold half a dozen or so.
That's super.
And,
Yes, yeah.
So it just gave a little more experience
And you
talking about it.
got to meet a lot of people.
We did. I got to meet you.
There you go. And you could talk to the authors, but also some of the people who attended, the attendees. And
So I want to thank Robert Hayes for setting that up.
he is always good in having that fair every year.
Yes.
So, and we're looking forward to to next year too. So this new book that you have coming up, what's that one now?
Well, now this is interesting. It's to me, it's interesting. I'm taking the first book I wrote, The Agitator and the Politician, and as I look at it, I think, oh, that story needs much more, and it needs to be told in a very different way. So I've taken the first book I wrote, The Agitator and the Politician, William Lloyd Garrison, Abraham Lincoln, and the Emancipation of the Slaves, and I'm rewriting it. This is going to be the second edition.
Oh, okay, good.
But this is much better, I think. So don't buy the first edition. The second edition will be out very shortly.
Good.
This is it in raw form.
Oh,
And
wow,
I'm
nice.
having people edit it. I'm having a lot of people read it and give me their opinion about it, and including a couple of former colleagues of mine at Central Catholic High School.
Yes, yeah.
And so they went through with their blue pencils and told me what they liked and didn't like. And I made a lot of changes that they recommended. It's going to be very different from the first edition of Agitator and the Politician.
Yeah.
So I'm having a lot of fun doing it. I just went through it again. As I told you earlier, I can't find any mistakes, but I know there are some, so I'm going to go through it at least one more time
Isn't it funny? Yeah.
before I send it off to the publisher.
Yeah. It's funny how I belong to a writers group, and we do the same thing. Each month we meet. There are 10 or 15 of us in the group, and each of us submits 7 pages of our current writing project to each other to
Right.
critique. And so it's funny how the things that we thought were perfect
Yeah.
get taken down because we're using it's the wrong point of view, or it's the grammatical errors, or spellings wrong, or something
Yeah,
like
very
that.
much.
So
And something you thought was perfectly clear is not clear at all to everybody else.
yeah, and sometimes what a lot of people say in my particular genre, I'm writing fiction, and so they want me to use more dialogue rather than exposition, trying just
Right.
telling rather than showing, like you know. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, that's the hard part about writing fiction. I don't know if I could write it. In history, I have the dialogue written for me. I already know what they said. So the only problem I have there is I often have to footnote it to tell where I got that quote.
yeah.
But I know that they said it.
I was reading a little bit about in your American history about Clemens, Mark Twain.
Yes.
And so I was interested in he wasn't just a writer at the end. He had a varied career.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in his early days, as a young boy in Hannibal, Missouri, he saw slavery. He saw slaves being sold off the dock and being put on riverboats to be taken down to New Orleans. So he's well acquainted with that. As a young man, when the Civil War started, he joined a volunteer group to fight for the Confederacy. He was actually going to fight for the South. But as he put it, after a couple weeks of that, he got bored and lit out for the territories and went out west to California to look for gold, actually Nevada, to look for gold. So he had a little touch with the Civil War. He left, by the way, just as this Union officer was approaching with his men, and the guy was Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh.
And Twain says, "It's a good thing I left before Grant showed up, because I probably would have got him, and that would have been the end of the Northern War effort."
Proud.
The irony is that later in his life, quite a bit later, Twain had contact with Ulysses S. Grant and helped him write his autobiography.
Oh my God!
His
See
memoirs.
those little snippets like that, those nice
Yeah.
stories that you found out about.
Yeah, in fact, he saved Grant's wealth for him. Grant was going to die penniless,
Oh.
but he had cancer. He was dying. So Mark Twain said, "Look, I'll publish your memoirs, but you got to finish them."
Yes.
So
yes.
poor old Grant, sitting there on his porch, writing away on yellow paper with a pen, with a pencil, trying to get them done. He did get them done, and Twain published them, and they were very popular and very successful. And Grant had some money.
That's a nice story. See, that's
Yeah.
something behind the scenes. You know,
Yeah.
you never know the backstory there for what he was involved with.
Yeah.
I
of course,
remember. Excuse me. Go
You
ahead.
know, at the end of his life, besides being a writer and a humorist, Mark Twain was very hostile to American imperialism. He
Yes.
thought it was grotesque that we took over the Philippines and any of the islands that we took over in the Pacific, and also Puerto Rico. He wrote a lot about that and how horrible it was that we thought of ourselves as so much better than these people, that we would take them over and literally beat them up.
That is terrible.
Yeah.
Yes, you never think about that.
No, but he had definitely a very strong opinion about that.
Yeah. And that's, in fact, why we left England, was because of the imperialism.
Yeah, they were
that
turning
was
around
there,
doing the same
and
thing.
we ended up doing the same. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, very good. So we've talked about the 4 books, I guess, or have we?
Yeah,
talked
yeah,
about
we have.
the books, and you wanted me to ask you some questions, I guess, and I think you told us about the book. You told us, about organizing things.
Mm.
How do you go about organizing your voluminous amount of information?
Yeah, that's one of the big problems in writing a history book. And I think it would probably be a big problem in writing any kind of a fictional novel, because you want to have everything hang together. You don't want to have something come up in chapter 7 that's totally out of joint, that doesn't make any sense, because nothing laid the foundation for it. The reader doesn't know where you're coming from with that. So maybe something about that has to appear in chapter 1 so that they're ready for it when it comes up in chapter 7.
Yes.
So how do you do that, right?
Yes.
How do you make that organizational schemata, so to speak?
Sure.
Well, the way I do it is I'm a very visual person. I'm very visual. And I also like colors.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I take, first of all, I decide on the chapters I'm going to have. Maybe there's 12 chapters. So I put you know how the police sometimes solve a murder and they have all the stuff up on the wall?
Yes.
They do that because it helps them see all the connections, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I put at the top of the wall, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and each one has a color on it.
Yeah.
So then as I come up with other cards that have information or quotes, I stick them under the chapter
That is relevant.
that's relevant to that, and I color that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I change the color because I decide it'll go better in another chapter. But then gradually, then I have it all on the wall. I can look at the things. I have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and I can decide, well, okay, so those all belong in that chapter, I think, but what would be the best order to talk about them in? So I change the order
Okay. Yeah.
around, but it's easy to do with the cards.
Well, yeah, and
Right?
when you see it visually, yeah.
And you can see it visually, and you
Yeah.
can see how, and now I say, all right, here in chapter 7, I talk about this thing, but I need to have had something about that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I look back to one of the earlier chapters to see if I did.
Yes.
You know, and then that helps me put that together. Maybe I have to make up another card to put something in an earlier chapter to cover that.
Yeah.
And as you're working with it like that, when you have it all so visual right in front of you, you haven't written a thing yet. All you've done is,
Organized.
it's like building a house, and all you've done is make the framework.
Yes.
But if you make that right,
Yes.
then the rest is just planking.
It's easy. Yeah, it's easy to
Right.
put it together, and I think we call that storyboard in fictional writing.
Exactly.
We write a storyboard, so you know the beginning, the middle, and the end. You sort of know where things should be written.
That was always the hardest thing I had in teaching in high school. The kids wanted to just start writing. If they had an essay to write or a paper to write, they just wanted to get right down, get it over with, right?
Yeah.
And I'd say, no, you don't build a house without a blueprint. You should never write an essay without a outline, some kind of a structure for it.
Yeah.
They would resist. So sometimes I've made it part of the assignment. You've got to hand in your outline first.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that's part of organizing
Sure.
things. You just can't blurt out things. You need to have some rhyme or reason for one thing following another.
And you have to always realize that your reader is always in trouble. He's always getting lost.
Yes, yeah, and you want to make sure he's got a map to follow.
That's right.
That he's reading something that's either in sequence or related, so that he knows where he's going. Give some. You said you wanted to give some examples. Oh no, you said something about keeping the interest of students. How do you go about that?
That ain't easy.
I know, of course, I know.
As my story of Tina in the book there points out, most of them are pretty resistant. They don't really think it's important.
Yeah.
What good is it going to do me to know about Abraham Lincoln when I'm trying to make money, They can see the usefulness of, learning how to how to do hair, right? Because they're going to make money doing that.
Yes.
But history? So, and and it's more than the crap you learned in high school. I try to show, one thing I learned from Lincoln is how you should make decisions about things by being very careful about waiting until the moment comes and then you need to make the decision. Don't make a decision too soon.
Too soon, yeah.
Wait until all the facts are in, and that's sometimes hard to do because you want to jump and get it done.
Yeah, you want to blurt it out there.
Yep, you want to have it all set. But Lincoln showed in many instances during the Civil War how it is important to wait, watch, let everything get committed as much as you can. Have it clearly in your mind when you have to decide. And don't decide until then.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
and then you can see with the whole picture by then, and that's when you decide.
Yeah.
And he was very good at that, and that's
Yeah.
one of the lessons I've took from Lincoln.
Yeah, but it's hard deciding when that time is, too.
Yeah, sometimes for him it was easy, like the commander at Fort Sumter at the beginning of the war said, I'm going to run out of supplies by April 14th. 1861, so Lincoln knew, all right, April 14th, I've got to decide what to do by April 14th. I mean, the guy gave him the date, right? It wasn't always so clear. The other big issue he had at time was when to decide to announce he was going to free the slaves.
Yeah.
The timing on that was a little more tricky.
So, very good. We've covered a lot of ground here. I think you've talked about your books that you have, your latest project you have coming up.
Yeah, I'm very proud of this, by the way, because I thought the Agitator and the Politician that came out in 2005 was very good.
Yes, yeah.
Although I didn't particularly like the cover, but that's another matter. This one, I'm sure, is going to have a much better cover.
Good. Good.
But you can't tell a book by its cover, as they say. And but I think inside it's going to be. I think it's going to have a lot of information there presented in a nice, clear, understandable way that help people understand how the slaves were freed.
Yes, yeah.
And what the Civil War had to do with that, how the Civil War was fought with that in mind.
Yeah.
And what led up to all of that, how westward expansion, for example, had a lot to do with the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves.
And some of those same ideas plague us today, too. Even, the way we are treating immigrants even today.
Exactly.
And comparing that to the way we treated slaves. So,
And the race issue.
and the racist issue.
There's a lot that comes up with Lincoln. I think a lot of people are surprised to know that Lincoln really tried hard to come up with a plan whereby most of the freed slaves would be sent away to some other place,
Oh yes, yeah. But
colonized in Africa or Haiti or Panama, anywhere but here.
Yeah, yeah. But in fact, and that was his a plan that he came up with, huh?
Well, he kept searching around for places. It was not a plan he came up with. A lot of people have been talking about it for years.
Yeah.
But he was very slow to give that up. It was only in the last year of his life that he realized, you know what, they're going to stay here, and we're going to figure out
A way that
how
we
to make it work. And then Booth shot him, and that was the end of that.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Well, very good. So we talked about the books. How do you go about pricing a book? You had decided how, some people online, they say they want to try to sell their books for 99 cents, and other books put $50 as a, I know it's worth $1 million to you, but
Right.
How do you decide?
Well, actually, the publisher I have is Word Association Publishers in Pittsburgh, and they set the price.
Okay.
And it's $19.95 for my most recent two books, American History is More Than the Crap You Learned in High School, and Rants, Raves, and Reflections of an American Historian.
Okay.
And my new book, The Agitator and the Politician, will also be done by them.
Okay.
And I imagine it too will be $19.95.
About the same price, yeah. And then obviously the Kindle edition is a little less than that because it's
quite a bit less, actually, isn't it? $9.95?
$9.95, yes, yeah. So that's a hard decision to make. Have you decided any events coming up that you think you'd like to participate in, or?
I don't have any signed up right now,
nothing, yeah.
but I would certainly be happy to show up at anything
Anything, sure.
anybody might have. People can buy my books from me directly. You may know this as well. If they buy it from me, I'd be happy to mail it to them. I don't know how to tell them how to do that, but postage free.
Yes, yeah.
If they send me the $20, I'll send them the book. It's rmacdougall66@gmail.com.
So yeah, I was going to just ask you. So you do have a website. Excuse me, an email address.
Yes.
And repeat that again that you just said.
R. MacDougall, MacDougal, 66@gmail.com.
Okay, great. So we have the email. You have a website too.
I do. If they look up my name, or I'm also on Facebook. I don't usually do much lately on Facebook, but I am there.
Okay.
And as I said, I'd send it postage free. It's much better for me, I have to say, if they buy it from me directly.
Yes. Yeah. Of
If
course.
they buy it off of Amazon, which they can do, they can go to Amazon and just type in my name, and it'll come up.
Yeah.
I only get $1.50.
I know. Yeah. It's very, very small amount of money.
Right.
So we have your email, we have your website, and we have also you're on Amazon, like you just said.
All four of them are on there.
Okay. All 4 books are on there too.
But don't buy The Agitator and the Politician on there. There's only one left, and that's the old edition.
Okay.
Wait for the new edition.
Wait for the new edition
Right.
to come out. Well, very good. Is there anything else you'd like to include in the interview? With us sort of come to a close here.
Yeah. No, I just, for anybody who's listening, I had a terrific time teaching at Tewksbury High School.
Yes, yes.
I know it's the big rival of Wilmington, but, we were friends in the end. And so I enjoyed all my students there and the time I had teaching there. Some people considered me a little bit of a traitor when I went to Central Catholic, especially when I also coached there. But it's all teenagers, it's all students. And
that's the love of your life, yeah.
That's right, and they all were eager to learn history, so I was happy to be there and work with them.
And contribute to their lives, too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nice that you're able to share something with them, and hopefully they enjoyed the camaraderie that you had with them. And
Some of them did.
Well, very good. I think we've come to a close then of the program. This again, I'd like to tell our audience that this is Mark's Musings. We are broadcast on WCTV.org in Wilmington, Massachusetts. And we try to produce a program once a month. And we're happy that we had today Robert MacDougall. And don't forget, you can get him by email or on Amazon or on his website. And so that's it for now. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.